Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fibro-Fix Summit. I'm Dr. David Brady, your host and author of the book, The Fibro-Fix. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing a true pioneer and giant in the field of functional medicine, and a very respected colleague and a friend, Dr. Susan Blum. And Susan has been treating patients with the functional medicine model in helping people with chronic disease for almost 20 years. She's has a faculty appointment at Mount Sinai in their School of Medicine. She's just a passionate advocate for people with chronic disease and helping them find true answers to the root causes of why they're ill and helping them actually recover instead of just covering up their symptoms in a 6-minute office visit like they might have experienced somewhere else. She's the founding director of the Blum Center for Health, which is in Rye Brook, New York. She's on the medical advisory board for the Dr. Oz Show. You may have seen her on Fox 5 News, ABC News Nightly. She's regularly quoted in Real Simple, Harper's Bazaar, Redbook, and many more. And through her practice, her educational efforts, her wonderful writing, many of you have read some of her books, I'm sure, and she'll mention those a little bit later. She's basically been a real, like I said, pioneer in empowering patients to take control over their health and become their best self-advocate to recover from chronic disease, which we so desperately need today. So thanks for taking time out of your busy practice and being on the summit.
Well, thank you for having me, David. I feel very much the same about you. We've been traveling this road together for a lot of years,
Yep.
and I'm so excited about your book and how it's going to help a lot of people. And I'm very happy to contribute in any way I can, to how the information that people need, to help them feel better. So
thank you. And you've traveled this road of this type of authorship in particular before me. So you've been one of the select few colleagues of mine who've been extremely helpful and instrumental, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So as we know, the world of academic writing and publishing is a little different than the popular book and popular writing and publishing. So it's been a bit of a new landscape for me to navigate, but it's been a blast, and I'm really looking forward to the book helping a lot of people, because it's really a case of taking the story right to the people instead of writing to just my colleagues dealing with those people.
Yes, you need good patient-centered books with how-to, deconstructed, very simple to read, and so
and
I think
entertaining
people find it
along the way. And and you know what? Part of what we do in functional medicine, I really think, is we really go back to that role as physician, as educator, and trying to, I think we serve more as really knowledgeable, sophisticated health coaches almost. We teach our patients to really empower themselves into their own recovery and not relegate their health outcomes to us as some expert that's going to give them some magic solution in a bottle or something. It just doesn't work that way in chronic disease, as we know. And patients who are really motivated really need that information, and they don't always get it through the normal routes of care when they go to their family physician or their internal medicine doc or even a specialist. And as well-being as those physicians may be, they're just not used to that kind of model of interacting with their patient.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I get people all the time that are learning everything from the internet.
Right.
And I'm sure you are too. And it's really the place. They don't get information from the doctors anymore. It's all from the internet. And there's too much information on the internet that's very confusing. And actually, I think I spend a lot of time, I'm sure you do too, going through with the concerns that people bring in based upon what they read. It's almost creating a generation of health anxiety. People anxious about their health because they're concerned about what they're reading. So today we get to really give people good information about toxins, right? Something they probably read a lot about, but have a lot of questions about because they don't know how to sort through, the information.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of how that internet, revolution is a double-edged sword. It's great because people have access to tremendous information, and patients come in. Sometimes they'll lay PubMed abstracts on.
I know.
They're looking in the right places, but still it's hard for them, if they're not trained, to always contextualize even those really good research studies and put them into perspective. But then there's such other stuff on the internet that is just so crazy, and it's hard for them to really, parse it. So what we're going to do is deal with the issue of toxicity and detoxification, because if you go on the internet, they're calling everything under the sun detoxification, from things where you're just basically making yourself with an irritating bunch of herbs have a bunch of diarrhea, as that's going to detox you, to many...
And a cleanse, and the idea of a cleanse and what that is,
mono-food diets, all these different things. So we're going to talk about detoxification from a very evidence-based scientific perspective as functional medicine doctors do it, and why it's such an important foundational element with our patients who have chronic disease. A lot of times we kind of start there as our foundation, and we do it for a very good reason. So why don't we just start sort of at the 30,000 foot level and talk about what do we mean when we're talking about toxicity, toxins, and detoxification? Because the word is thrown around like crazy, but I think a lot of lay people are confused.
Okay, so I think we should start just with what are toxins, because that's confusing enough for people. So let's just start there, and we'll make our way through to get to how do you get them out of your body, which is really what detoxification is. So a toxin, and actually it's sort of fascinating. If you look at the strict definition of a toxin, the word was developed to describe those compounds made by actually organisms or biological organisms that cause illness in humans. So things like spider bites and snake venom and, tetanus toxin. And, these are actually where the word toxin came from. But toxins have now been expanded to include this whole group of something called environmental toxins. And I think that in general, those are the toxins that we are all dealing with, as a whole. When you and I are talking about what kind of exposure do you have, what are the toxins, and what's causing disease in our bodies. And so examples of something like this are sort of pesticides. So environment, what's in our environment? What are the toxins that we're really concerned about that I see all the time with my patients? Pesticides, right? And people get pesticides from their lawns. They get pesticides from the golf course, on our food, right? And so this whole, we can have a long discussion about where pesticides come from, but they're ubiquitous, and we all have a lot of we all have some pesticides in our body. It's been measured. There have been studies that have shown everybody has low levels of pesticides. So pesticides, plastics, so much. And these are all man-made issues, right? These are all man-made sort of pollutants that have polluted our environment and are now polluting our body. So we've got pesticides, we've got plastics, and plastics have a whole range of things in them that are problematic. It has compounds that are called endocrine disruptors, things that are estrogen-like in our body and can cause disease from that whole perspective, both hormonal issues as well as autoimmune issues with endocrine disruptors. And then there's things like, the actual chemicals like PVCs and BPA and the names, language that people are a little familiar with. So that's the whole plastic problem. And then we have the whole world of inorganic compounds like lead and mercury, which are accumulated in the environment and then accumulated in our body when we eat them or we're exposed to them. And so you have, lead and mercury, and then you have all the chemicals at home, people's cleaning products, smelly stuff, off-gassing solvents, and hand sanitizer and like all these chemicals that
the flame retardants that are off-gassing from your new drapes and your new carpet and your bedding and clothes, and exactly, and
the varnish on the floors. There's been huge, stuff in the news about the floor, these flooring companies, and they made it in China and it off-gassed, and so all this stuff, and then we have cosmetics, and the cosmetics are a really big issue in terms of parabens as well as some lead in lipstick and things like that, and we'll talk about what to do about these things, and I'm just sort of going through the list, and that's, I think, the big list. I think the other one that people don't think about sometimes is gasoline, and the off-gassing of vapor, and especially benzene, that's in gasoline. But I think it's really important when we're talking about these individual toxins that sometimes people go, well, I don't really have that, and I don't really have that, and I don't really do that, and I don't play golf. But what people have to understand, and I try to explain, is there's a concept called toxic load. It's not just about one toxin being the main problem. The problem is that it's sort of like your cup that fills and then spills over, right? The toxins at any given time, as I'm looking at you, David, your toxic load is an accumulation of all the exposures you've ever had.
Right.
Right? Both magnitude, like how big the exposure was, and how long you've had this exposure.
Do you mean when I was young and we used to ride our bikes behind the DDT spewing mosquito spraying truck while our parents were up on the porch drinking a highball and having a cigarette, and no one queued up that this might be a bad thing to do?
Exactly.
That might be affecting me now, even.
Absolutely. Well, and actually, those pesticides, they're fat soluble, so they end up in your fat cells, right? And that's one of the reasons sometimes people can't lose weight.
Right.
And it can create inflammatory fat, as you know. But yes, so it accumulates, and people end up with this accumulating load in the body. Now, at any given moment, your toxic load is a balance between all that exposure and how well you've been able to manage it in your body, how well you've been able to keep up with it. And the way the body keeps up with it is it detoxifies the toxins or eliminates them, processes them, transforms them for excretion. And in order to do that, you need to have a lot of nutrients, right? So antioxidants, and you and I are going to talk more about this. But there's also genetics come into play. Yeah. Some people are handicapped. The liver, nature gave you a liver, a soul liver, to manage these toxins and mobilize them and clear them out of the body. It's like your body's filter. But the liver needs a lot of nutrients, and it also has enzymes that are very genetically sort of programmed.
Right.
And so some people are very handicapped. Like myself, I have a big impairment in my glutathione system. And so glutathione is a very important antioxidant for clearing out mercury, for example. So I'm very sensitive. I will accumulate mercury much more easily in my body than someone else.
Right.
And so you and I understand this. We know how to test for it, which is very good. But this is why every person sitting in front of you and me, or everybody listening to this, anybody's toxic load at any given moment is the net result of all that exposure and how well you've kept up on it. And keeping up, when I say antioxidants, it's your diet. It's it's sort of living a detox lifestyle, which includes what you're eating.
Right.
Lots of color, fruits and vegetables and all that. So that's, I guess, my answer to, or my explanation for what are toxins, and they all matter. Because at any given time, it's what's your toxic load, what is living what's still stuck in your body, and how is that then affecting your health?
And you made some great points there, because a lot of people will say, well, I don't know that I was ever exposed to some big toxin, and I never worked in like an industrial environment. I don't think I've ever been exposed to this stuff. And the reality is, being on the planet, particularly in a Western industrialized country, particularly in the United States, particularly on the East Coast, like I am and you are, we get exposed to these things. And if you're of our generation, even the leaded gasoline and all of the vapors from that, we usually find significant amounts of lead in people in, certain age bands before they get away with the lead in the gasoline. And then all of these micro exposures, whether it's from plastic residues, from pesticides and herbicides on our food, flame retardants in commercial products, whatever, and naturally occurring lead and mercury in the environment in other ways, it's often a micro exposure that compounds one on the other, and it's not just one toxin, it's multiple ones. And a lot of these things have been studied, and the government says, well, this amount of this toxin is safe, like this amount of pesticide to spray on a crop is safe. They're basing that on a one-time exposure at that dosage, often, and not multiple toxins over multiple years. So a lot of this does come down to a cumulative experience, combined, like you said, with genetics, where some people make really robust levels of certain enzymes that are involved in the detox process, and other people don't. Some people make lots of the enzyme, but they make it a little strange, like structurally, so it doesn't work as efficiently. So there's a lot of different variables. So you and I look at people as individuals and do the right kind of testing, whether it's genetic testing, enzyme testing, whatever it may be, to try to personalize a detox program for someone. But even someone trying to help lower their toxic load on their own, we're going to talk about some steps that they can, build into their life to stack the deck in their favor.
Right. And actually, when in terms of treatment and how to reduce your toxic load, a lot of times people will say, well, how do I get that particular pesticide out of my body? Or how do I get that particular, chemical, plastic residue out of my body? And again, it's the same, it's the flip side of the same coin. what we're doing is we're tuning up your body's ability to excrete all toxins. We're going to lower your toxic load. You don't have to specifically go after a particular toxin other than heavy metals, I guess we could say. We both sort of do go after heavy metals in its own sort of singular way. But the rest of it, we don't have like a one-on-one, where you're going to go. And you don't need to, because if you tune up the liver, you give it all its functional support that it needs, you clean up the environment, you clean someone up from their exposures, the liver will start reducing your toxic load. It'll just do a better job.
And it's designed that way from the beginning, right? It's non-specific. Yes. We have these global enzyme pathways in these conjugation patterns and things like that where the body is really good at adapting to a new toxin, a new compound that it may have never even been exposed to before, and using some of these common pathways that are flexible. They sort of will be able to almost deal with anything. And that's the only way that humans have survived the 20th century, right? Because we were exposed to so many new chemicals and compounds that were man-made, essentially, or extracted from a natural compound or distilled or whatever, that we've never confronted before. So we could have never genetically developed enzymes specifically for each toxin. We had to have a non-specific system. So if we have a non-specific system, then the way, as you said, to deal with being a better detoxifier is not necessarily to have to go after each compound individually, but just basically globally increase your capacity and your ability to detoxify in general.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Okay, so how about connecting the dots a little bit between how having these toxins in the body can then translate into someone feeling sick, having fatigue, having pain, having cognitive dysfunction or brain fog, or a myriad of chronic diseases.
Yes. So, and that's where the rubber hits the road, right? How do these toxins really come into the body and cause dis-ease or illness? And I think we should start with the word inflammation, right? And I think we should deconstruct that a little bit, because a lot of people don't even know what that word means, right? And so toxins can cause inflammation in the body. And what does that mean? So the old way we learned it in medical school, was inflammation means redness, swelling, heat, and pain. Right?
Yeah.
So
Calor,
it's
ruber, dolor, in the old Latin. And we're old enough to probably be taught it that way. Probably not anymore.
We were really taught that way, but I think it's really helpful, and I like to explain this to my patients because, redness, swelling, heat, and pain, if you think about that, you can envision that inflammation then is if you see it on the outside of your body, like like arthritis or a swollen finger or an injury that's getting inflamed, you can see it. Right. But on the inside of the body, you can't always see it. But you can imagine that same process is happening somewhere inside of you. And inflammation is so what is that? It's the reaction to the toxin triggers some sort of an irritation in the body that releases these chemicals. Your immune cells get sort of poked and irritated, and they release these chemicals. And your tissues themselves have these chemicals to be able to release them. And it causes an accumulation of fluid, and it causes a lot of irritation locally in that area. And that irritation and accumulation of fluid causes swelling, and that local reaction causes pain. And it causes then dysfunction of the tissue itself that it's in, right? And so it might not work so well. Right, so if you think about your thyroid and you think about mercury in your thyroid gland, the sort of inflammatory reaction in your thyroid gland causes the gland not to work so well, right? And so toxins then trigger direct inflammation in a tissue. They can also then trigger that sort of dysfunction in your immune cells directly, because your immune cells are busy trying to sort of disarm those toxins. And so there's your immune cells themselves can get impaired in their ability to work because they're chronically worn down from dealing with the toxin.
And in the acute stage, when you learn it in medical school at the most basic level, they're really giving the example like a a sprain strain or, some kind of injury where it's an acute thing. You can see it and you can, it's swollen up, it's red and all. And in the early acute stages, inflammation is a natural protective response. It's part of our innate, most basic immune response. And it could be a reaction to an infection, to some sort of injury. And it's actually bringing in the immune system and putting it at work to clean up any infection, but also to help heal the tissue and get it back to normal. But in many cases, and in most chronic diseases, it becomes a persistent sort of negative, damaging type of lower level inflammation that you can't see as much anymore. It's not as obvious, but nevertheless, it's there doing its dirty work.
Exactly, which is why the long-term exposure, your body can deal with sort of a one-time exposure to something, but if you have chronic ongoing exposure to toxins that are accumulating in your body and you end up with this toxic load, which means you have a persistent sort of presence in your body of all these toxins, your immune cells are going to be chronically annoyed and, not work. That it could cause direct dysfunction and loss of tolerance, actually, of your immune cells, which can cause autoimmune disease, but it can also be causing chronic inflammatory sort of processes from those immune cells as well as locally in the tissue. So one of the ways your body combats with that is by sort of the fire hose of putting those fires out are antioxidants, right? And so if you start losing that battle where you have too much sort of inflammation, something called oxidative stress, free radicals, you end up with sort of this whole idea, what we call oxidative stress, which is not enough antioxidants really to put out the fire of all of those free radicals and that whole inflammatory sort of ongoing process in the body. And so you end up sort of with a net deficit of antioxidants.
And though isn't the modern dietary stream, the standard American diet or Western diet, which has come to rely more and more on these processed foods and foods of convenience that are full of chemicals and full of toxins, actually, and they're relatively devoid of those phytochemicals, those natural things in whole, fresh foods that serve as the antioxidants to put out the fire. So we're basically force-feeding people more fire, and they have less water to put out the fire at the same time. It's a recipe for illness.
Exactly. And actually, for me, one of my important ways of assessing sort of the toxic burden and whether the toxicity is really sort of playing a big part in somebody's process is by doing an assessment of their sort of antioxidant status, right? Looking at oxidative stress and seeing, does it look like the toxins are winning, this battle?
And it's interesting in functional medicine when we pick apart the detoxification pathways, we're very cognizant that it's sort of this two-step process. You'll hear people talking about phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1 is sort of about taking this toxin and whatever the cost, making it more water soluble so we can move it around the body so it doesn't get stuck in a tissue like the nervous system or the fat. But sometimes when we do that, we actually self-generate even more oxidative stress, and that intermediate that we call it between the two phases can be more producing of oxidative stress than the original toxin. So we're really relying on the fact that we have a good phase 2, which we call conjugation, to come and grab it and pull it out of the body. But some people have an imbalance and a breakdown where they're producing all these toxic intermediates and then they don't have enough antioxidants to protect themselves during that. And then they don't have enough of the things we use to latch onto that toxin to actually pull it out of the body, which we call conjugates.
Right. And since you're bringing that up in terms of the natural generation of free radicals in the body, I think we, again, have to understand, just like inflammation is a natural process and of healing, that our biochemistry every day, especially in our mitochondria and every cell of our body, we make free radicals. That's the way that our bodies work. It's sort of like the sparks in an engine.
Right.
You have sort of an engine and there's sparks, but there's lubrication. And, you build an engine with ways to put out those sparks, just like nature gave us all those antioxidants as a natural remedy to our natural biochemistry every day. And so it's this whole balance between stress and recovery, stress and recovery, stress and recovery. Our body, a human body, we are naturally always stressed by our own biochemistry, by nature, but we have to have the tools to recover, and it's always that dynamic balance, and assessing where somebody is, in that balance is our job, and an important sort of way to assess if this is contributing, or where in a chronic disease, if you're evaluating somebody who has some chronic health issues, where are they in their stress and recovery, balance in the body.
So how do we start tilting the scales in someone's favor? How do we help their detoxification process in the functional medicine paradigm?
Well, I think that there's a multi-step process to really moving people along to helping the body do better. The first thing is you have to clean up the environment. I mean, you have to sort of clean someone up or help them understand where the exposures are coming from. And this is something that, people reading your book, people reading my book, you have really good instructions for where to look, how to do this. But you really need to look at, are you using pesticides on your lawn? Are you using, if we do evaluations and people have high mercury, I always counsel people on, fish consumption and where to choose the,
Right.
lower mercury fish or limiting fish, cosmetics, sending them to, Environmental Working Group has a great database on, cosmetics and, and really guiding people on where is your exposure coming from.
And we have an expert on the summit talking just about that exposure to cosmetics.
Okay.
Yeah, because fibromyalgia is by and large a disorder, of females, and females are the biggest users of cosmetics, and it's a big source of toxicity. And it's a hard thing for people to change because they become, used to, all the women in my life, they like certain cosmetics, and it's hard to get them off those. You know what I mean?
Well, I know, and because there aren't that many options.
Right.
But I think with all the awareness that's happening now, with all of our, I do feel like that there's a sea change, and our movement, our functional medicine movement, has been really in the lead of putting out information for people to try to make different choices. And as you know, the way that it works in our economy is businesses grow with people's pocketbooks. So
Right.
If there's a demand for a product, hopefully we're going to see more of it. And in my lifetime, I've definitely seen more options in terms of cosmetics. So I'm hoping, that all that'll continue. But also things like cleaning your house, cleaning products. You can go, and if you had other people speak about this, we don't need to. But the main thing is, glass water bottles.
Right.
I'm doing, I got it from Lululemon, whatever,
right.
the glass water bottle, and no more plastics, really doing all those things you can, and really trying to get pesticides out of your world, because that whole idea, and actually a couple of other ways that we didn't touch on of how toxins come into the body and cause illness is a lot of toxins have estrogen activity in the body. And these are called xenoestrogens. And there's another name, they're called endocrine disruptors.
Right.
And they can cause a condition called estrogen dominance, which is just toxic estrogens in the body that are too estrogenic. And women can experience, fibrocystic breast, endometriosis, fibroids. We're concerned about breast cancer and all sorts of, strong, anything when you think of strong estrogens, that's sort of, you worry about that. So I just did want to circle back, and talk about that. And
it's interesting. I just saw a paper the other day, on this link between estrogen and autoimmunity, because we know that in the vast majority of autoimmune conditions, they're much more prevalent in women than men. There's some exceptions, I think ulcerative colitis and diabetes type 1, but generally that's the case. And they did an interesting experiment in this study where they looked at the men that got autoimmune diseases that are usually associated with women much more prevalently, like Hashimoto's and Graves and things like that. And they tracked it against their estradiol levels. And sure enough, the higher the estradiol level in the man, the more likely they were to be one of the men afflicted by these autoimmune disorders. Really amazing.
That's amazing. And yes, there's a lot of really good, research on the connection between xenoestrogens, especially in RA, lupus, and people with a positive ANA. It's very common. And certainly with mercury, there's Hashimoto's and ANA, lupus, MS, scleroderma. There's a lot of studies looking at all those connections as well. Yeah. So, so I just wanted to mention xenoestrogens. And then, of course, the direct, I know I'm circling back because I just wanted to make sure to mention about mitochondrial damage,
right.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, that toxins can directly impair mitochondrial function, I think, which is important for fibromyalgia.
It makes you feel fatigued and not have energy
and tired.
And achy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's muscles, it's fatigue, right. It's achiness, it's brain fog, it goes into the nervous system, and so, and direct effects like that.
And that's why in my book, The Fibro-Fix, the first foundational thing while you're reading and trying to find out, hey, do I really have this, classic fibromyalgia, this central nervous system pain processing disorder, or do I have a myriad of other things that gets mislabeled as it? Regardless, you're probably going to benefit metabolically from a baseline detoxification, sort of a cleanup reset of the metabolism. So there's a 21-day sort of foundational detox. And I know you take the same kind of tact in a lot of your programs.
I do. And actually, so let's move into that now. So you clean up your environment. So somebody comes in for their first visit with me, and actually, unless I think they have a terrible sort of dysbiosis, which is imbalance in gut flora, or SIBO, or some real sort of terrible like gut thing going on, I usually send them home on a 21-day detox.
Right.
And part of the reason is because I do believe everybody needs a general cleanup, and even my healthy people. I mean, I think you and me, we do it
twice a year.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So twice a year, it's like spring and fall, a little cleanup, and it just helps you sort of reboot, unload, and just drop your toxic load from the everyday toxins. I go out to restaurants. I don't eat, when I'm in a restaurant, it's not an organic salad at every place I go. And so you definitely, we get exposure. You can't live in a bubble, right? So the way to combat it is to just do liver. I really think of it like a liver tune-up, like you said.
And the other good part about that is it's the first entry point of getting the patient to sort of engage actively in their own recovery.
Yes.
Which sucks in a lot of different parts of their lifestyle, their diet, their behavior, things like that. So I think there's value even beyond the biochemical rationale of it.
Well, then speaking to that, it has the power to help you feel better very quickly.
Right.
And so between the first and the second visit, sending people home with just sort of a clean, the whole detox diet, and instructing them on how to clean up their food from toxins, as well as, the gluten, dairy, soy, corn, eggs, taking away all the, alcohol and sugar, and really cleaning things up, and giving them liver support supplements to really turn that, filter on. What I like to say, I use the sort of image of one of those you live in Connecticut, so, those ponds that are all over the place that have algae growing all over them, right?
Yeah.
And so if you took a pond like that and you put a sort of filter or fountain in the middle, all of a sudden, it goes on, all the gunk starts coming out of the pond, and, the pond looks clean, after a week or two,
Right.
And so it's really, you just want to fire up that liver filter, and it just starts helping clear out, the toxins, and people feel better. They sleep better. Brain fog goes away. Headaches go away. Muscle pain, and in a lot of ways, it's both therapeutic and diagnostic. Right? Because we get to know when they come back, if they felt so much better, we know then that some of their symptoms are either triggered by toxins or their food, because we change food at the same time. And so it helps us really be onto something. And if people come back and they say, I did that whole detox program and I don't feel any better, you have to go look for another trigger for what's causing the problem. And so it's a great way to sort of move down the road, and when you get to that fork, is this the problem or not, and how am I going to engage that person to want to be in this program? Because when people feel better, if you can help people feel better pretty quickly like that, they're going to say, wow, I'm in.
They're motivated.
Yeah. I am in. My goal is to help people understand. I want people to connect how choosing to live and eat this way helps them feel better, because then they'll continue to choose that. They're not going to choose it because I'm telling them to.
Right.
It's creating that sort of aha moment. You know what? I feel better.
Yep.
And am I going to choose? Am I going to choose pain, or am I going to make adaptations? And am I going to choose to live this way so that I'm not in pain?
And sometimes making these larger metabolic changes and shifts and changes in neurotransmitters and everything else does take a little time. We're not giving an opioid pain medic. It's just a different thing. But we live in such a fast expectation society, right? Fast food, immediate gratification. People want to see, in a day or two, they want to feel better. And if they don't, they're on to something else. And this just doesn't work like that in lifestyle medicine. But doing something like a detox, it may not fix all their problems, but it often makes them feel enough different with their energy level, with their pain level, that they go, okay, I can see now this is going to be worth my time and effort.
Right. But I do want to point out, if we move on to, okay, well, you do your 21, what else is important in detoxification? Or 21 day is just a place to start.
Right.
Because, I do a lot of assessments for toxic load. And so I'll measure mercury, and there's different ways to measure that. You could do blood tests with red blood cells, which gives you a window of, the average of exposure over the past 3 or 4 months. Or I do the overnight urine collection with chelation pills and sort of try to get assessment of the toxic load. I test oxidative stress, and I try to get a sense of, and history is so important, right? Yep. And if somebody comes back after they've done the 21-day detox and my tests show that there's, we're onto something, they're better, but they're not quite there, and they have what we've decided, me and the patient together, based on testing and their story, they have really a big toxic load, then we go on. I send them home with 3 more months. I'm like, okay, you've got, let's stay with detox support, 3 months.
Right.
And sort of, they have to stay there. It's not, 21 days is not going to all of a sudden magically get rid of all of the toxins that you've accumulated in your body for some people. For some people, they're generally that, it'll be a nice reboot and they're sort of done after 21 days. But for people with complex chronic inflammatory conditions that have toxicity as the main driver,
it's just sort of a table setter foundational.
It's a table setter foundation. And then you work together for what that means to sort of do a long haul, detox. I have one Hashimoto's patient that comes to mind. Her thyroglobulin antibodies were like 3,000. I mean, something ridiculous. And really the studies have really linked the thyroglobulin antibodies in particular with toxicity. For the thyroid gland, I needed to keep her on liver, some sort of, I changed it up as we went, but really some basic liver support program for almost 2 years.
Right.
Supporting her liver and enhancing detoxification till that came down to a normal range.
You brought up that concept of toxins and autoimmunity. I know you explored that a lot in your book, The Immune System Recovery Plan, in a really wonderful way. And people often will not be able to quite understand, how can a toxin create an autoimmune problem? Like, how can it make my body attack itself? And the simple story is that some of these toxins can actually combine with some of our proteins in our body. In the case of mercury, we know that mercury is what we call a transitional metal, and many of these metals can kind of latch on to these things hanging off of our own proteins, these sulfur groups on our proteins. And when they do that, they make the protein what we would call a hapten, but it's now a modified protein. It doesn't look like it did structurally. So our immune system looks at it and goes, hey, that's not me. That's something else. And it attacks it. So, and that's just one example, but many different toxins and even pathogens, organisms, bacteria, viruses, they can present proteins and other things that can confuse the immune system. And then it starts sort of going off the rails, if you will, and attacking our own tissue, because the protein on the microbe might have looked a lot like the TSH receptor on your thyroid, right? So you get that confusion that's thrown into the mix, and it can be the genesis of one of these autoimmune disorders.
Yes. That was a great explanation. Thank you. It's really good. No. I'm glad you went back and explained that, because the concept of autoimmunity is complicated, and that is one way. And I think for toxicity, that's probably the best way to think about it. And the other way, when it comes to toxins, is by direct damage to your the developing immune cells.
Right.
Where they just don't work right, and they get confused. But I think more often you see, probably you see both. In both. But yeah. And so I think that at the end of the day, we just, when we're, anyone who's listening who has any kind of, it's just prevention too. You want to prevent, any developing a chronic illness, whether you want to unload toxins because they're in your fat cells and you can't lose weight, whether or not you have inflammatory people listening because they have fibromyalgia or any kind of inflammatory autoimmune or complex chronic inflammatory illness. Working to lower your toxic load in your body has to be one of the foundational parts of your program.
Right.
It just is. And if you're on your own and you can't get tested, we have some tests that we do. Like I talked about before, there's some blood tests, urine tests. But on your own, you can take sort of these sort of questionnaire. You can just go through your own sort of checklist of your own exposures.
Right, and many books like yours and mine have questionnaires.
So we have questionnaires
for that reason.
self-assessments for toxicity, and then you can embark on a detox program, which we all, there's all sorts of online programs. I have an online program for my book, and I'm sure you will too. And so you really can get support, in doing this. And
a lot of those programs, people may not understand, like we said, online, they'll call all kinds of things detoxifications, even if they're just sort of colon cleanse kind of things. But our detox programs are more based upon the actual biochemistry of detoxification, where we're going to do things like balance that two-phase system, where we don't want phase 1 too fast, and we want to give all the things we call conjugates, which are usually amino acids, to the people so that they can attach them to the toxins and pull them out of the body. We want to protect them through the process with lots of antioxidants. And the detoxification process is very energy intensive, and it's very protein dependent. You need all of these amino acids, particularly sulfur-containing amino acids, for the detoxification machinery to work. So the best way to deliver all of that stuff in a way that's easy for someone to comply with is with a high protein, high conjugate, a lot of these other nutrients all rolled in to a pleasant tasting shake, basically. Yeah. That's why it's delivered in that mechanism. And it's hard to do with just pills. We can have pills and capsules that sort of complement the whole process, but that shake kind of paradigm works perfect for detox because of some of the technical reasons behind what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and because sometimes it's hard when people get started, they don't know what to eat for breakfast because we're taking away their gluten and dairy, which is what everybody eats for breakfast. Exactly. So it's really easy. It's like, have the shake for breakfast. You won't worry then about what we're taking away. Yeah, for sure. One more thing I guess we did want to touch on that I want to make sure we do before we end is chelation.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And I do want to bring that up because I'm not, you can sort of share your approach on chelation, but I'm very conservative, and I am as well. I'm very, very conservative, and I think that, in my opinion, there's definitely a place for chelation, and I use oral chelation when I use it. So I use the DMSA pills, and I don't do IV chelation here. And I'm actually setting up an IV program, and I still don't think I'm going to do IV because I've never really needed to do it, and I think it's a little bit intense on the body. Right?
It's amazing. We're totally in sync with that because I do oral chelation generally, DMSA or even N-acetylcysteine and many other things that complement it, forms of glutathione and the like. But I was in a large group practice for many, many years in my career where they did a lot of IV chelation, and I definitely saw the value in it in some people who were to that point. But I found at least 95% of the people, I think, were fine with really well-constructed and conservative oral chelation protocols. It was less expensive, less intrusive in their life. It worked fine. It's not a race, right? I don't think you really need to use it that often. I'm glad some people still do it, and I refer to them, but usually you don't.
But I think exactly. And so I do want to point out that I don't even do that much chelation anymore. And part of the reason why is because I find that I have found that I'm doing really good helping people lower their toxin load, getting the mercury out, getting the lead out with just liver support, with just continuing to feed the body what it needs to do it on its own.
Yeah, because ideally it's designed to do it.
It's designed to do that. Right. And so I very rarely, there was a time where I was doing a lot more, and I still do it sometimes for sure. Yeah. Like if I do that and 6 months later we retest and we're still sort of stuck, I'll do an oral chelation sort of program with someone. But I never do an oral chelation program until they've done at least 3 months of liver support. Right. Because when you start giving those chelation pills, and what does chelation mean for those of you not sure? Chelation just means, actually, there's probably a Latin part to that too, and you'll probably explain it better than me. But it just means, you're giving somebody a compound that's going to grab onto the metal. And it takes it and it pulls it out into your urine is really what happens.
It's like a taxi cab to shuttle it out of the body.
It shuttles it out of the body. Yeah. And so the thing is, when you take the chelation pills, you sort of start moving the metals around. Right? And there's concern about if you start moving it around and you can't keep up excreting it as it's moving, it can backfire and sort of stay in the body. Right. And I know when I had mercury like 15 years ago when I first discovered I needed to work on this, I couldn't chelate myself. I got headaches. Every time I would take chelation pills, I was getting headaches. And that's a sure sign that moving the metals, you're not really getting it out. And it sort of could be backfiring. And so I do a lot of cleanup work before I'll chelate someone. And a lot of times people will come in and say, I saw this other functional person or something, and they want to put me on IV chelation, and they've done no cleanup yet in their body. They've done none of what you and I are talking about clean up your world, get your antioxidant status up, do some liver support for several months, make sure your gut's working really good. You dump toxins out through your bile and into your gut. You've got to be pooping. You can't be constipated.
And just unconjugating them in the gut and sucking them right back in if you have the wrong kind of bacteria there, right?
So if your gut's a mess, you've got to clean up your gut and do the whole gut program, our whole functional medicine. I'm sure you and I do that the same as well. Clean up the gut, 3 months of liver detox, and then we'll retest you and see if you need chelation. And so that's my little, I think it's really important.
Perfect. Great advice. Wonderful advice.
To sort of share that with everybody, my position. That's my advice on that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, you've been an incredible wealth of information, and you have such experience in this kind of approach. So it was just great to have you on the summit, and I'm sure everyone learned a lot. Where can they learn more about you, your work, your center, your detox programs? Give someone, an avenue to go to find out more about you.
Yes, so I have a great website. It's called blumcenterforhealth.com, and that's my whole center.
Right.
I also have a very robust online program on blumhealthmd.com, and that's where all my online programs are.
Okay.
And so I'm in the process of rolling out the gut. I'm doing, we're going to have a 10-day and a 30-day gut cleanse up, starting in 3 weeks. So, that by the time this airs, it'll be out.
Yeah.
So the site will be up, and the gut cleanse comes first, and then in 2 more months, I'm going to relaunch my whole 3-month Do It With Us immune system recovery plan from my book.
Great.
So I'm in the process of actually what I've been busy doing is really trying to convert everything we do at Blum Center here and put it all up into online programs with coaching and make a really robust online platform. So go check out what I'm doing there, and that's blumhealthmd.com. So all of that is where I'm at, and people can come and read all about it. And of course, my book, the Immune System Recovery Plan. And I'm busy writing another book on arthritis. So,
awesome. So you'll
that'll be the next book.
Amazingly popular. I can't tell you how many patients have come in holding it, and carrying it, and which is great. I knew that most of my work was done when they came in with the book.
Well, that's really nice. And you're going to get like the emails, people even after the summit. Right. You're going to get emails of people that are just so grateful, of the way you help them through the book. And at the end of the day, for me, and I know for you, that's what keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we went into this in the beginning.
That's why we went into it, and the book is just another vehicle to help get the word out to so many people that you can get better. Yeah. People, you have hope. The conventional paradigm for fibromyalgia, for autoimmune disease, there's no hope. Just take meds, treat your pain, and that's it. We're giving people hope. Because we can help them get better.
Well said. Thank you so much for being on. If you want to take any of this valuable information home with you today, just click on the button either on the side or below to do so. Certainly visit Dr. Blum's site and check out Fibro-Fix.com as well. And I was glad to have you on the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.